somewhere in southern England, 8,000 homing pigeons are about to be released from these specially converted trucks.
What's it like where you are? Terrible.
With a storm coming in from the south, the stewards are anxious. Pigeon racing exploits an extraordinary gift. Released from unfamiliar locations, pigeons will fly up to 700 miles back to their lofts at speeds of up to 60 miles an hour, navigating with an apparently magical sense of direction. For some people, pigeon racing is a matter of life and death. But for these hardcore fanciers, it's much more important than that.
Pigeons are they're wonderful things. They're a mystery.
Pigeons are not flying rats. They are athletes of the sky, and that's exactly what they are.
I've been in pigeons all my life. I've never done nothing else. When I go to sleep, all I dream about is pigeons. When I wake up, the first thing I want to do is go to the pigeon loft.
There's nothing better to look up in the sky and see your pigeon fold its wings and drop straight onto the loft.
And when you win it, it's even better. Next best thing to a good cup of tea.
The strange ability of pigeons to find their own way home has fascinated us since ancient times. In 776 BC, homing pigeons were used to carry the results of the first Olympic Games across the Greek world. But even Aristotle didn't know how they did it. Pigeons are only the tip of the iceberg in the global story of animal migration. All over the world, people have wondered at the seemingly supernatural gift of animals to navigate great distances. How do they manage to perform these epic journeys, sometimes halfway around the globe, returning year after year to the same place? What guides them? Finally, modern science has brought us within reach of solving one of the last great riddles of the natural world. And after decades of research, it seems that the key to unlocking this mystery has been under our noses all along.
Despite their rather humble place in the modern world, they have taught us most of the fundamental principles that we have uncovered about what is one of animal behaviour's most mysterious phenomena.
We are on the verge of understanding what migration is and how it works and how the birds orient and how they navigate. And this is sort of a puzzle, and there are pieces of the puzzle well defined and clear, but the whole picture isn't clear yet.
In the international world of navigational science, 3 camps have emerged, each with its own distinctive theories. At Oxford University, Dr. Tim Guilford argues that pigeons are guided by visual cues in the landscape.
There are still many, I think, unsolved mysteries in animal navigation. One of them is the way in which the visual landscape is used to navigate in the familiar area.
In Germany, at the University of Frankfurt, Professor Wolfgang and Dr. Rojvita Vilško support the magnetic-based theory of navigation.
Yeah. We, of course, are advocates of pigeons having a magnetic compass.
And I have to say, as they probably have 2 magnetic senses, one in their eye and one in their beak.
And finally, in Italy, at Pisa University, Dr. Anna Gagliardo argues that it's all olfactory, that pigeons follow their noses.
Pigeons learn the smell of regions which are totally unfamiliar to them. They have never been to those regions, but they know the odors coming from north, the odor coming from south, from east and from west.
In addition to these distinguished scientists from some of Europe's oldest and most respected universities, there's also a dark horse in the race, Dr. Rupert Sheldrake.
There have been a whole range of theories over the years, the sun, smell, magnetism, and so forth. But the evidence against all these theories is much stronger than the evidence for them.
Dr. Sheldrake is about to put a cat in the pigeon loft of Newtonian science. Armed only with a floating garden shed, he's devised an experiment which he believes could at last resolve this great mystery. Dr. Sheldrake calls his theory Morphic Resonance.
I think fields called morphic fields link together parts of organisms and members of societies and link together animals with their homes as well. I think these fields have a kind of memory due to the process I call morphic resonance.
Dr. Sheldrake lectured in biochemistry at Cambridge University before leaving to explore his own theories in parapsychology. This is Ragsy, one of Britain's leading pigeon fanciers. He's volunteered to help test the theory of morphic resonance. It's not a field Ragsy is familiar with.
What's his name? Rupert Sheldrake. No, I've never heard of the name Rupert Sheldrake.
You will do.
Good.
It will be Ragsy's responsibility to look after the floating loft and the 22 fledglings that will grow up here and make it their home.
A couple of nice little blues. Got a nice blue checker here. They look well. Nice little pigeons.
But this is no ordinary pigeon loft. Dr. Sheldrake has peculiar plans for these young birds.
That's a nice little pigeon.
The loft is floating on a pontoon at Sharpness Docks off the River Severn. Over the next few months, Ragsy will accustom these birds to their floating home, and then, once they're used to it, he'll start the process of moving the loft from place to place.
The normal pigeon research involves taking the pigeons from their home and then they find their way back home. In this experiment, the idea is to take the home from the pigeons and see if they're released at the normal place where the home was, whether they can find the loft in its new position.
Yeah, nice set of young pigeons there. I'm sure they'll do us proud.
Is this simply a cruel joke played by Sheldrake on these young birds? Or is Sheldrake about to blow the lid off the scientific establishment?
Hopefully they'll enjoy their stay. For the looks of that one, he's ready.
Pigeon racing is a sport followed fanatically by over 500,000 fanciers around the world.
This hen here, it's just done 520 miles from Marmande in France. And just think, you know, they come across the channel. What makes that pigeon hit that beach and think, right, what's the other side? But I'm going for it. At the end of the day, this is their home. I'm in it basically because they want me here, really. I'm feeding and watering them. It's a 5-star hotel. Why leave it and go and live on the streets?
Pigeon fanciers like Ragsy rely upon the pigeon's natural instinct to home, to which they add a few tricks of their own to increase the pigeon's desire to get back as quickly as possible.
We keep the hen away all week. We introduce her to the cockbird 5 to 10 minutes before the race. She will then play up to the cockbird. And basically, it just drives him wild. And from then, he knows every time he comes home from a race, he knows she's there.
Wake up, boys. Time to go. It's nearly your time. We have to wake them all up first because some of them are sleeping. Come on. Time to go. Don't be slow. It's time to go.
The weather has cleared, and the chief steward has decided the race can now begin.
Ready? Gives me goose pimples every time I do it. Lovely. You know what I mean?
There's no doubt about what pigeons can do. The question remains, how do they do it? For Rupert Sheldrake, pigeons homing to their lofts, while miraculous, is nothing new. He's exploring the implications of a far more mysterious phenomenon.
Probably the most mysterious navigational abilities that animals show Our ability is not to go back to a particular place, the home, but to find a particular person who has moved away from the home. This happens with dogs sometimes. Sometimes people have to move, they leave the dog behind at their home, and they go to a new job tens of miles away, even hundreds of miles away. They somehow sense where that person is and can find them at a distance.
One such well-documented example took place during the 1914-18 war, when Prince journeyed solo from England to France. Prince made his way across war-torn Europe to track down and be reunited 125 miles later with his owner, Private James Brown.
And there's no way any kind of navigational system based on global coordinates could explain that. The only thing that could explain it, in my opinion, is a bond between the person and the animal that gives them a sense of direction, a bond like a kind of invisible elastic band that stretches out between the two of them and provides a pull towards that person.
The same phenomenon that took Prince across unknown landscapes to a never-before-visited destination, Dr. Sheldrake wishes to explore with his floating loft. Might these pigeons, like Prince, be drawn on invisible elastic bands back to their home?
Science, as it expands, enables new things to happen, and many of them are things that were considered paranormal in the past.
By moving the pigeon loft from the pigeons, Dr. Sheldrake is turning convention on its head.
Some people think I'm a maverick, and some people think I'm a heretic, but I see myself as somebody who's just exploring what we don't understand.
Oxford's Dr. Tim Guilford is one of Britain's top natural scientists. He studied homing pigeons for the last 15 years. He's also a champion paraglide pilot.
There are still many, I think, unsolved mysteries in animal navigation. One of them is the way in which the visual landscape is used to navigate in the familiar area. Is the landscape in some way giving position to the bird that can then use a compass to orient from that position to home? I mean, one thing I've learnt about pigeons and birds in general is that they're extremely flexible in the strategies that they use to navigate, as in many things. The bird's visual system is different to ours, and they see the world differently. They have a much broader visual range. They can see almost 360 degrees around them. When you're flying, you realise that what is normally a three-dimensional landscape to us becomes very two-dimensional, almost map-like. Everything is flattened. And to an extent, I think that's probably the way birds see the world. I'm pretty sure now that the visual landscape is very important for the way the birds map their familiar area. Evolution comes up with amazingly powerful, simple solutions, and I think that's what we're looking at in bird navigation. There's no point in having a big brain if you don't need the processor. I think it's just very nicely worked to solve the problem in the simplest acceptable way. And that looks amazingly sophisticated to us. I mean, it's perhaps not so sophisticated. It's a sort of elegant simplicity, and I find that very beautiful, actually.
Tim Guilford's visual cue theory seems to make common sense, but not everyone accepts his ideas. In Frankfurt, the Wilczkows don't believe sight is the pigeon's most important navigational tool, even in familiar surroundings. Dr. Roswitha Wilczko doesn't think that size necessarily matters for pigeons, despite the fact that their pigeon loft stands directly beneath one of Germany's tallest buildings, Frankfurt's Europaten Tower. Landmarks don't come any bigger than this, and yet the Wilczkows birds don't seem to use it to home to.
Well, you see, it is very distinctive for us because we are ground-dwelling animals and we look up to it. If you're in the air, it might not be that distinctive. We don't really know how pigeons see landmarks. Of course, we know pigeons have eyes to the side of their head. which gives them a very good panoramic view. However, they can hardly see any landmarks down in front and below, because that is a part of the visual field that is specialized for food packing. They are, how do you call it, nearsighted. Extremely nearsighted.
Myopic.
Myopic, yeah.
So this part of the eye is specialized to be highly myopic, just to see the grain, and all the others see the panorama around. The eye is looking up to the sky and looking if the hawk is attacking.
Looking at this television tower, you know, it's just one television tower. It might not be as impressive for a pigeon as it is for us.
The Wildscoes are not Guilford's only opponents. Professor Klaus Schmidt-Koenig conducted a series of experiments in the 1970s, which he believes challenged the importance of sight in homing.
I had the idea to reduce vision in pigeons, in homing pigeons, by attaching frosted lenses, and thereby reduce vision to an extent which I can show you. I now have my nose about 2 centimeters away from the frosted lens, and I now move away about 50 centimeters.
Even with its vision clouded by the frosted lenses, the pigeon manages to land, if a little uncertainly, on a neighboring rooftop a mere 30 yards from the loft. It walks the rest.
We were all surprised that pigeons deprived of image vision were able to home. Took them a little longer, but they made it.
So if pigeons don't rely on vision to get them home, what do they rely upon? Magnetism. That's what the Wildscoes believe.
And they probably have 2 magnetic senses. A compass in the eye and a kind of magnetometer in the beak of the birds. They can measure the intensity of the magnetic field and thus can determine whether they are north or south of home. You see, this second one is a learned system. Young pigeon, it comes out here out of this loft and starts flying. Almost when it's flying to the north, it will experience that the magnetic field increases a little bit, and always when it is flying south, it will experience that the magnetic field decreases a little bit.
I think it's something like, how do you interpret gravity? You just feel it, you know when you're standing upright, and I think it's something similar to that.
In addition to their magnetic hypothesis, the Wildscoes believe pigeons rely more on the sun compass than landmarks, and they have a test to prove it. Clock shifting is an established method of disorientating the bird's sense of time by artificially simulating day and night.
The light goes on 6 hours before sunrise and goes off 6 hours before sunset. And if you do this for 5 days, their internal clock is shifted. That means their feeling for time is shifted. Now, if we now release them at noon, they think it is already 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And while the sun in reality is in the south, they estimate that somewhere in the west.
In effect, the pigeons are jet-lagged. Their body clock says one thing, but the sun's position says another. So when they are released, although they can see the Europatum Tower, they are disorientated and will fly in another, predictable direction. For the Wildscoes, this is further proof that Tim Guilford's visual hypothesis is flawed and is not the most important factor in homing.
So they definitely do not need landmarks. It's a question, to what extent do they use landmarks if they are available? Not so very much, at least that's what our feeling is.
With their combined magnetic and sun compass theories, has Frankfurt shot down the Oxford theory? Oxford may be known as the city of lost causes, but Tim Guilford remains quietly confident.
Well, the Wildscoes data to date suggests that birds are using things other than guidance by visual landmarks, even in the familiar area. And that doesn't fit very well with the data that we're starting to get here.
Tim Guilford and his team have been working with state-of-the-art global positioning trackers attached to the backs of their homers. For the first time, scientists can record the exact flight path taken by the birds.
I think the most surprising thing that we found using GPS is that birds follow their own individual habitual routes home, and these routes are not often the most direct route home. So there's something more important to them than just energetic efficiency.
Dr. Dora Biro retrieved the tiny tracker to download the second-by-second data from the flights.
Well, I'll just peel off the tracker off the Velcro on the bird's back quite carefully. This will have data from every second of the journey, so it's been about a 10-minute journey. Hi.
Hello.
Genius bird's back.
Excellent. Let's see his final 3 training tracks.
So that's...
The blue lines represent the almost identical routes a pigeon will habitually take from a familiar release site.
Very religiously following the road, isn't it? That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's just straight down the road from the start.
Until the very last point.
I mean, he goes...
Carving off towards home here.
Yeah.
Let's see what he did today.
Mm.
Oh, that's nice, isn't it?
That's really good. I released him.
The red line shows a new release position, revealing how the bird locks onto its accustomed path once it's recognized the underlying landscape.
He hits the route, he follows it pretty nicely, actually.
Yeah.
For Guildford, this confirms the importance of visual cues.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So this would be a raised landmark.
Yeah, it's an overpass, yeah.
Because yesterday you released him on the other side of the...
Yeah, yesterday's track's this one. So he starts out there, and there's a church steeple just under here, just there, which is where he used to fly over. That's,
that's beautiful, isn't it?
You can see that's the church, the black.
One of the theories for how birds use visual landmarks is that they steeplechase. It's called steeplechasing, and the idea is that they go from one prominent landmark to the next in a chain. And actually, our data suggests that's quite a consistent explanation. That may well be what they're doing. Steeplechasing allows a simple way of memorizing what would otherwise be a complex route. You can remove all of the fluff from your memories and just have prominent landmark followed by prominent landmark.
Dr. Guildford's experiments are proving that birds recognize, remember, and use familiar landmarks to orientate by. Of course, this doesn't explain the process by which birds find their way home from places they've never been to before.
And that has truly still, I think, got mysterious elements to it. That's something we haven't fully solved.
This final enigma is the holy grail of navigational science. And it is here in Italy that the most radical and unexpected theories are being developed to explain true navigation. Many people can claim to understand how pigeons find their way home, but after a lifetime dedicated to them, Major Claude Hill knows more than most.
My father, my grandfather, my 2 uncles were pigeon fanciers, so I was virtually born into a pigeon family straight away. And then from then on, I was hooked.
Doesn't your wife get jealous, Claude?
No, we've been married 65 years. I don't think there's much chance of that.
During World War II, Major Hill was an officer in the Army Pigeon Corps and trained his birds to carry top-secret messages.
Pigeons were used for the purpose of message carrying when the Army commander demanded radio silence. There was nothing better than a pigeon to deal with messages backwards and forwards.
After 80 years of experience and with countless awards to his name, can Major Hill explain the phenomenon of pigeon homing?
If I knew that, I would be very lucky, because I could answer all the questions, but I can't. When I used to go to Belgium, the Belgians had blocks of copper hanging under the loft, and they said it was magnetism. There are various theories. Even my grandfather had a pile of droppings at the side of the loft nearly as tall as the loft, and he told me that the pigeons flew to smell.
The idea that pigeons might home by smell, following their beaks to track odors over hundreds of miles of unfamiliar territory, seems far-fetched. But this is exactly what is being proposed here in Italy. Pisa University has a long history of radical new scientific theories. In the 17th century, Galileo revealed that the Earth, in fact, orbited the Sun. It took 200 years before the Vatican finally took his theory off the banned book list. Dr. Anna Gagliardo leads her research team on a new radical hypothesis. She agrees with Major Claude Hill's grandfather and thinks pigeons do indeed use odors to find their way home.
Pisa is famous in the world of pigeon navigation studies because it's here that the olfactory navigation hypothesis was proposed by Floriano Papi in the early 70s.
Professor Floriano Papi is the godfather of the olfactory hypothesis and sees no evidence to support the rival magnetic theory.
E abbiamo potuto alterare la loro mappa. So we believe that pigeons use an olfactory map on the basis of a long series of experiments, beginning from those which showed that pigeons without smelling cannot home.
For the Italians, this is the bottom line. Pigeons that can't smell cannot home. Dr. Anna Gagliardo is trying to find out why.
The winds pass across regions, different regions, with different vegetations and with different environment. And pigeons learn, therefore learn the smell of regions which are totally unfamiliar to them. They have never been to those regions, but they know the odors coming from north, the odor coming from south, from east and from west.
So what does this olfactory landscape look like? One of the problems with the theory is that it is so hard to imagine, as Anna is the first to admit.
Another reason why the olfactory map hypothesis is counterintuitive is because when you say that pigeons use the smell for homing, people think that they smell the loft, and this is not true. It's also not possible.
It's not about following a scent trail. It's about recognizing an entire jigsaw made up of smells. Each landscape has its own distinctive olfactory signature. The birds remember where each lies in relation to the other, like a sort of patchwork of odors, with the winds carrying information of what lies beyond.
We don't know which odors are important for the pigeons and which odor they use. But what we know and what is really sure is that anosmic pigeons are unable to home. If you put magnets on pigeons' head, they home. They might be scattered at the beginning, especially in overcast conditions, but then they home. If you release pigeons with frosted lenses, they cannot distinguish very well the landscape, but they home. But if you release anosmic pigeons, they don't home.
Anosmic from the Greek, an without, osme, odor. Novocaine is used to anesthetize the pigeon's nasal membrane, temporarily knocking out its sense of smell. And what the Italians have found out is that a bird that can't smell can't home.
Not really looked into the smell side. Don't know much about that, to tell you the truth. Don't know. Perhaps that's why I never won the other year when I repainted my loft. They didn't get used to the smell.
Ragzi has now trained Sheldrake's pigeons to home to their loft on the Sharpness Canal. It's almost time to put months of work to the test.
Come on in, come on.
Rather than move the pigeons from the loft, he's going to move the loft from the pigeons in order to test his theory of morphic resonance.
Morphic resonance is a process whereby there's a kind of memory in nature. Similar things resonate with subsequent similar things. And what this theory says is that the so-called laws of nature are more like habits, that each species has a kind of collective memory. The idea is to move it a short distance to start with, to get them used to the idea that it can move, and we'll do it over progressively longer distances. This is the first canal pontoon pigeon loft experiment ever conducted in the history of the world, as far as we know.
Good. Come on in, Babs, come on. Come on.
Sheldrake speculates that rather than being drawn to a fixed position on the Earth, The pigeons are attracted to their physical home, to the actual loft itself. And where the loft goes, they will follow.
Come on.
At first, the loft will be moved just a short distance, to the other side of the canal. But for birds descended from rock doves, finding a home that has moved at all is an entirely new situation. Dr. Sheldrake's detractors might point out that the loft has only gone 100 yards from the original site. But for Sheldrake, all the greatest journeys have begun with the first step.
Looks as if they're trying to land. Yes, they are doing. It'll take them a while just to assimilate what's happened, as it would you and me if we went home and found our house had moved. We'd take longer than this. They've been, what, 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes. To take me longer than 5 minutes to adjust to my house moving.
Yeah.
Rupert Sheldrake concedes that he is now venturing into the unknown.
I think that time they saw it over there, and if science was just status quo, what would be the point of doing research? I mean, it would be really boring. It would just mean that the textbooks had practically all the answers. The job of research was to fill in a few tiny details. It would take a lot of the fun out of science if we really knew how things worked. To say it, fortunately, there's a great deal we don't know.
In Italy, meanwhile, Dr. Anna Gagliardo is also conducting a waterborne experiment designed to test how important a sense of smell is to a homing ability. The great composer Puccini had a house on this lake and composed his most famous operas here. Apart from inspiring some opera, the other importance of the lake is it simply doesn't allow the pigeons to land. They must decide on the wing where they're going to and in what direction home lies.
Well, this is an experiment with birds which have been raised confined in an aviary. So this is really their first flight. The control birds were raised confined in an unscreened aviary, so the winds can get through the aviary. And so they can learn the association between the odors carried by the winds and the wind directions. Instead, the experimental birds been raised in a screened aviary. So the winds actually can enter from the roof, but the birds cannot learn about the direction of the winds.
The Pisa team claims that birds brought up in lofts shielded by plexiglass cannot connect the different wind directions with particular smells. What the Italians have discovered is that while unshielded birds can home successfully, the birds from the screen loft can't.
The control birds will concentrate towards the home direction. So they will disappear all in the same direction, roughly in the same direction, towards home. While the screened aviary birds will disappear in a different direction. So you get a randomly scattered distribution. 194. They are disorientated. The birds raised confined in a screened aviary are not able actually to orient, learning the association between the direction of the winds and the odorants carried by the winds.
Dr. Gagliardo is not saying pigeons home to the particular smell of their faraway loft, like some flying bloodhound. Instead, by recording the sequence of distinct smells of a region and relating these to wind directions, they can navigate from one area to another, even areas they have not visited before, and eventually find their way home. Is the mystery of True navigation finally yielding to the Italians' olfactory theory?
I think the evidence in favour of the olfactory hypothesis, coming from principally the Italian group, is very convincing. But it's not the only theory.
And back at the docks, Dr. Sheldrake's pigeons are still circling. Ragsy decides to cross the canal and give them some encouragement.
Having flown round several times where the loft was, looking at it, they clearly knew that that's where it had been, and they were registering it wasn't there. Great work.
Sheldrake and his theory of morphic resonance are still in the race. The first small step of the experiment has been a success. The pigeons have got used to the fact that their loft can shift location.
It's fantastic.
But the real test is still to come.
They were brilliant, those pigeons, and the way Ragsy called them in was extremely effective.
It's the start of our sort of exercises, and they've passed it with flying colours.
Sheldrake may not be home and dry yet, but as he is quick to point out, his more orthodox rivals are also at sea.
The Germans are very good at pointing out the weaknesses of the smell theory and the evidence for it. The Italians are very good at pointing out the weakness of the magnetic theory.
With Dr. Guilford's visual cue theory only providing evidence for local orientation, the two contending factions for true navigation, Pisa and Frankfurt, are apparently irreconcilably opposed.
These two camps will barely speak to each other on some occasions because they're so convinced the others must be wrong.
Olfactory navigation still rests on half a dozen unproven premises, so I'm not convinced.
Magnetic map theory is not supported by any evidence, actually. So I really don't know.
Although magnetism and smell may play a part, I think that the real basis of pigeon homing is neither of those, but rather a field which science hasn't yet described or admitted.
For the past 2 months, Ragsy has been taking the loft up and down the canal, getting the pigeons accustomed to the idea of finding a home that can move. The next stage, the loft is loaded onto a seagoing vessel. The moment has arrived to move the loft.
That's a nice pigeon, that.
The birds are unloaded for release from the original home site. At first light, loaded on board the sand dredger Riparian, the loft will go through the locks out onto the Severn estuary and beyond to open water. It will be moored 40 miles from the docks in the lee of the island of Steepholm. Back on dry land, Dr. Sheldrake has arrived at Sharpness to supervise the pigeon release.
Sorry, I'm just holding a pigeon.
Tim Guilford and his colleague, Dr. Dora Biro, share some of their technology with Sheldrake. By attaching GPS trackers to the birds, it's a chance to find out exactly how the pigeons find their floating home.
Rupert Sheldrake here. We've just released the birds. How are things on the boat?
Choppy!
With a storm brewing out in the channel, the pigeons appear to be in no hurry to be going anywhere. There's nothing that Dr. Sheldrake can do except watch and wait and hope that the pull of the invisible elastic bands on the birds will be strong enough to lure them back to the waiting loft.
This has been 21¼ hours since they were released.
The following morning, Dr. Tim Guilford joins Sheldrake at the release site. It's an opportunity for some rigorous cross-examination.
Is to see whether they can...
Come on, what is it? What is it that we can't explain?
You see, I don't think the magnetic theory works. It works as a compass, perhaps, but not as a map.
Yeah, probably not.
I don't think it's a calculation of latitude and longitude from the sun's position. And we know all these sort of normal theories don't work. If this were the one mystery in biology that we don't understand, it would seem plausible that perhaps just the normal theory would work. I think there are a lot of things in biology we don't understand, and all of them, to my mind, point towards a new kind of field which isn't yet admitted within biology. Oh, look, they're just taking off.
Mid-morning, and the pigeons have at last flown from the shed roof above the original loft site. Could they now be heading out to sea? Dr. Sheldrake sets off to join Ragsy on the Riparian. The weather conditions are far from ideal, and Ragsy, who's never been to sea before, is not feeling at his best.
Oh, I've never felt this bad before. You just can't get rid of it.
No.
Oh.
Once again, Dr. Sheldrake must now wait to see what happens, hoping for evidence of a mysterious, undiscovered force field in nature that he calls Morphic Resonance. By noon the next day, Ragsy is getting his sea legs, but the pigeons have yet to make an appearance. The tide has turned, and the Riparian must now head back to the dock. Has Rupert Sheldrake's theory of morphic resonance finally slipped from the quantifiable structures of science into the murky depths of the paranormal?
Maybe it's paranormal if you define the normal in terms of what ordinary science says, but it's not paranormal in the sense it goes beyond nature. It's part of nature. It's just a part of nature we don't yet understand.
Rupert Sheldrake can pick holes in the edifice of our theoretical understanding of bird navigation, but he can't give us a single critical phenomenon or fact that we can't in principle explain with the theories that we've got already.
A reception party awaits the return of the Riparian and its crew. 54 hours after leaving the Sharpness dock, the loft is back and unloaded. And as night falls, the pigeons decide it's safe to re-enter the loft. The experiment is over. Or is it?
So...
It may seem nothing much has happened, but Dr. Dora Biro has yet to download the GPS data.
Oh, that's nice, isn't it?
Very nice.
Oh, that's great. So it's spent lots of movement around where the loft was. This is a really interesting thing. Look at this.
Yeah.
Yes, right up the canal.
Well, looking at the map, it just proves to me that the pigeons have left Sharpness and gone all the way back up to Purton, where we had the last loft position. And as they've left that position, they've come down the canal, visiting all the other loft positions on the way down back to Sharpness.
And this is not the only remarkable bit of information the trackers can reveal.
And can we tell whether they went there early on in the day or later?
We should be able to see exactly when that was.
This is at 4:30 in the afternoon.
4:30 is exactly the time I go to go down to let them out. It's the time I actually first visit the loft, and around about 5:30, 5:45 is the time I go back to feed.
And that's the last point they went to.
That's the very last point the loft was, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of them finding the loft moved more than 30 miles down the estuary, the experiment plainly didn't work. But in terms of them finding the mobile loft and going into it and being able to adapt to new positions, it demonstrates that very clearly. And this trace here shows us more clearly than ever before.
We all use timepieces to keep to time, and these pigeons literally took off to find the loft at its old position at the exact right time, 4:30. It's brilliant. It is brilliant. It's amazing. I'm gobsmacked. I am gobsmacked. Seriously.
And what about the experts? Where do they stand in the great homing pigeon debate?
Yesterday's paranormal in science is tomorrow's normal.
I think parapsychology was never able to explain pigeon homing. It's a phenomenon of natural science and not of parapsychology.
I understand that this olfactory navigation hypothesis is counterintuitive. But if you release pigeons that cannot smell, they don't home.
You've got to wonder at that. You've got to see wonder in it. Understanding it is a great thing. I don't think it takes the wonder away, actually.
These animals are so interesting to work with. And, it is even so that I just started working on the magnetic orientation of chicken.
For centuries, pigeons have amazed people from every walk of life. But today, pigeons have brought us closer than ever before to unlocking the secrets of migration. But true navigation, one of the last mysteries of the natural world, remains tantalizingly just out of reach. Dr. Rupert Sheldrake hopes that one day he will discover the elusive law that finally solves the riddle which continues to divide the world's top scientific minds.
Oops, lost my hat.
Until then, paranormal or not, pigeons, those most ordinary of birds, are going to keep us guessing for a little longer.